Second panel is going to be chaired by Jim Abele. John Abele. I was close. Chairman and co-founder of Boston Scientific and Argosy Foundation. And Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, hello all. This has been an interesting session. That was certainly fun last session, and I hope we will do the same. You've seen two types of moderation, yesterday with Tom and just now with James, and now you're going to see a third. I'm a big believer in the sort of the wisdom of crowds, and so our panel is actually going to be doing a little bit of moderating themselves, in a way. They're going to do some of the questions, and let me start by simply restating what the title is and some of the questions that it raises. The title of this session is Venture, Philanthropy, and Entrepreneurial Nonprofits, Transformational Change Agents with Business Tools and Social Goals. Well, you should all be either sitting on or have underneath your chair a program that outlines the description of our panel today, and I think you will notice that some of the background actually is more in the venture capital world, but in fact the, let's call it positive impact venture capital. And so we're going to add that to our mission for this discussion. And I think we've particularly, both last night and today, there's been a lot of focus on culture change as a means of achieving the goals that we all seem to be interested in doing, but we recognize are extremely difficult to achieve. When you think about philanthropy, there are many different types of philanthropy. You can just give to a cause you like. You can do mission giving, which is the way our family foundation, Argosy Foundation, works. And it's also called venture philanthropy, where basically the definition is you follow the venture capital model. You have very specific goals, you have benchmarks, you use the rules for optimizing the likelihood of success. Then you have a lot of variations within that. You have loans, you have program-related investments, PRIs. So we're not just talking about one format. And if you think about social-focused business, from my point of view, even Boston Scientific was a profitable philanthropy. So you can stretch it and push it. But we had goals that were aimed on solving, in this case, health problems that we look at this way. And we'll obviously hear more of that from the panel. And I think Dean kind of summed it up for the corporate panel when he said, in essence, it's all about incentives. If you get the incentives right, things work. And this, of course, is literally the mantra of RMI and Amory that he has been talking about for so many years. So let me start to introduce the panel. Now, as part of this different style, I'm just going to give you their names and sort of the title. You already know what you read in the book, but part of what they're going to do is simply spend about 4 minutes, 5 minutes, saying what it is they're doing and what the connection to RMI is. The goal is not only to sort of tell it what you're doing, but you will recognize that these are knowledgeable people with a lot of experience. But the thing that's neat about it is they're all passionate. And that is what we're going to do. After we do that, then we'll start asking questions. Andrew Winston is on my right here, and he's got a book outside that you will learn more about. Julia Nova Hiddlesey runs an organization called the Lemelson Foundation. How many of you know what the Lemelson Foundation is? Just raise your hands. So, a fair number. And that is a very interesting model that fits really between traditional foundations and venture capitals. Bill Joy, we all know from the Sun background and his present Kleiner Perkins involvement. But more than that, he is sort of the classic questioner. Gadfly, maybe not the right word, but I think we're going to enjoy listening to Joy's comments. Jesse Fink, to his right, started Mission Capital Partners, and again is more on the venture capital side, but also has a foundation. In fact, the Joys have a foundation as well. And finally, at the end, is Michael Potts. Michael Potts is the new president of RMI, and someone who brings a very interesting background, who balances Amory's brilliance in covering many, many areas, but his job is to make sure that RMI is actually accomplishing these tasks even faster than they've been doing today. So that's our panel, and I'm going to start with Jesse. Will you please give us a background of what you've been doing, how it relates to RMI, and the brief lessons you've learned in 4 minutes.
Thank you, John. Well, I'll start with the RMI connection, because I think it is appropriate to be having this panel discussion and the previous panel discussion right here at RMI and at the 25th anniversary, and honoring RMI for the past 25 years, and more importantly, supporting RMI for the next 25 years, and really the next 5 years, which I think matter so much to the direction that our planet is going. So I'm pleased to be on this panel, and I'm pleased to be attending and supporting RMI. To try to put everything into 4 minutes, I guess I span the gamut between being an investor and being an entrepreneur and being an environmentalist. I started off as an environmentalist. I actually went to school for forestry in 1975 and thought that I could combine forestry and my interest in the environment with my interest in business, and realized in 1975 and 1982 that couldn't happen. I think the time has really changed now, and the fact that we're having these panel discussions where the world has changed, and no longer are we looking at environmental solutions and economic growth as the enemies, but recognizing that environmental solutions will lead to economic growth and sustainability. And so it's an exciting time to be part of that, and I think what it's going to take is real leadership. Leadership from the people who are in this room, and leadership, probably most important leadership, from the people who spend time in Washington, which will be a theme that I'm getting across. About 7 years ago, I exited from an internet company called Priceline, which I was one of the co-founders, and found myself in a situation where I had a lot of capital and a lot of time and a real philanthropic interest, very geared towards the environment. And I spent 4 or 5 years learning all of those different sectors, learning all about environment and environmental nonprofits, learning all about investments and how to invest capital in the most efficient way with efficient frontiers and asset allocation. And I was troubled by the fact that I couldn't use my capital to solve the same type of issues that I was giving my money away through the foundation. And so I went on a journey and actually surrounded myself with very talented professionals to see if there was some way to be in this X space between making investments and giving money away. First, looking to see if there was ways that we can do it through our foundation, but more importantly, to see if there was ways that we could do it through our corpus. What we found through the journey, and really over the last 4 years, was that there are many opportunities right now to make investments, sustainable investments, because we are in this transition to a low carbon economy. And just as we were 10, 12 years ago in the digital economy, digital revolution, which started then and will continue. We're in that same situation right now in the clean energy. Although this one has to survive, has to make it happen. And so I've spent the last 5 years exploring these areas, making investments, having quite successfully done so on the investment side. I spend a little bit of my time on the philanthropic side, which I can talk to later on as well. But I think that the land of opportunity is putting those two pieces together and making sure that we harness the power of the capital markets to really make successful businesses prosper in the transition to a low-carbon economy. We actually have to do that in order to solve the climate issues. It can't happen purely through supporting nonprofits, which we all need to be doing, and it can't happen purely through political. The business systems have to be put in place to make it happen.
Just a quick follow-up. What percent then is spent on the not-for-profit investments, the philanthropic side, versus the business for social good side?
Well, maybe I'll answer it in a different way. I spent a lot of time looking at SRI, socially responsible investment funds, and actually zero, I should say. I have zero investments in that. I do have $15 million of my own money invested in Mission Point Capital Partners, and I go to work every day. And that is really where, to me, philanthropy is not just your money, it's your time, and it's your resources, and using everything that you possibly have to make a difference. And that's why I go to work every day and try to surround myself with the best people to do that.
Just a quick question. How many of you in the audience would define yourselves as philanthropists? A number. And how many of you would define yourself as investors? And you can be both, of course. Okay, thank you. Julia, you want to tell us your background and what's been happening in Lemelson?
Sure, certainly some overlap in terms of core motivations. I have always been motivated by an interest in balancing economic development needs with conservation, and that's carried through my work, my educational background in human biology, conservation biology, and then later on international economic development. And I think it really came together for me when I spent a year doing research and work in Madagascar and was really looking at how to create economic incentives to generate sustainable livelihoods and conserve the island's remaining rainforest. I was working in the northeastern portion of the country, which is a very montane region and had the largest remaining tract of rainforest, and there were a number of communities bordering that forest who would regularly go through and conduct slash and burn agriculture, cultivate rice for a couple of years, and then move on when the soils lost their fertility. And I worked with a number of other partners to look at what sort of incentives could be created to allow these communities to see a benefit in preserving the forest for their own sustainable livelihoods. So we looked into things like medicinal plants that were harvested from the forest and could be sustainably harvested from the forest, but could not be grown outside of the forest and therefore depended upon the forest for that market. We looked at other things like ornamental plants, trade in palm seeds, and things like orchids, and gradually cultivated a local, national, and international market for those products, which help sustain these communities and also create an embeddedness between these communities' livelihoods and their forest and surrounding environment. So that's sort of my core motivation in terms of what I believe is important and where we're headed in this world. I think the how of what I believe is important, this theme has come up a bit. Dean came and talked a little bit about mindsets. President Clinton talked about embracing, how do we embrace the human side of who we are. I think empathy is really a key to how to change some of these systems barriers that we're facing. It's not just about the next tool, but it's really about how we relate to one another. And I think if we adopt a more empathic approach to interacting with all people, our neighbors, but also our global community members, that will really spur a lot of systems changing solutions that we haven't yet anticipated. To get to the foundation, the Lemelson Foundation, as John mentioned, it's a family foundation. It's an endowed foundation. We're dedicated to improving lives through invention. Our founder was an inventor, one of the most prolific inventors in U.S. history, with around 580 patents for technologies including barcode scanning, the automated warehouse system, core technologies to the VCR, camcorder, ATM machine. Also invented a lot of toys, the crying baby doll and other things. So invention is really at our core. And what we try to do through our work is work both in the US and the developing world to cultivate new ideas from innovators. We believe that innovation is evenly distributed through the world, that inventors are evenly distributed, and so we work very much to focus on cultivating local inventors in the developing world as well as in the US. And then also to invest in enterprises that are working on disseminating technologies that can either address basic human needs or advance sustainable development. I think one question I'd love to throw out to the audience to ponder, and perhaps we can get back to it through the dialogue. I think we've certainly touched on it in the panel this morning, and Jesse actually touched on it in his comments. But what do you believe personally is the purpose of financial capital? What is the purpose of financial capital? And I think we can talk about that, because I think that really drives how we're investing in the future. I'd also like to make a brief point about foundations. I think I'm the only one full-time employed by a foundation, although it seems that there are many who are affiliated with foundations. Foundations are a really unique institution. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Robert Greenleaf's work, but he was a great thought leader and coined the term servant leadership, and also wrote quite a lot about different kinds of institutions. And he talked about the foundation as being unique and endowed with certain responsibilities because it is not subject to many constraints that most other institutions are subject to. So for example, for-profit institutions are subjected by the force of the market. They can only do certain things. The market will correct them if they step out beyond certain parameters. Similarly, churches, a lot of nonprofits, churches, schools, hospitals, they have strong clientele or congregations that will limit them and check them if they take certain steps. Foundations are not limited in the same way. And so Greenleaf's belief is that comes with certain obligations. One, an obligation of prudence, and two, an obligation of creativity because of the freedom that you're given. And so the Lemelson Foundation is really taking both of those quite seriously. And I'd like to focus a little bit, perhaps later in my remarks, on how we're thinking creatively about deploying financial capital. And that includes on the grant-making side. Most of you may be familiar. It feels like the mic is going in and out. So I'm not sure where I lost you, but really in terms of thinking about how foundations can be creative in terms of their deployment of capital. Endowed foundations, as you probably know, are required by the IRS to disperse 5% of their endowment every year. And that's typically thought of as just pure grant making, where you're not expecting any return of capital. We've really diversified a bit and are growing in that direction. It's a rather new effort on our part, but to do grant making where we aren't expecting a financial return, but also to incorporate loans and equity investments at below market rates within that 5% payout. And I can talk a bit later about the kinds of nonprofit and for-profit enterprises we're investing in that way. The other theme that's come up more and more with foundations is thinking about their corpus, and so this endowment and how that capital is used. Is it being used in a way that's aligned with the mission and values of the foundation? Because of course that's the whole capital base. In our case, it's a $360 million endowment. We're grant making about $18 million a year, so it's a very significant resource. How is that capital being deployed? And are there ways in which we can deploy that capital in a way to have the same kind of impact we're trying to have through our grant making?
Thank you, Julia. That's a lot of good thinking that we need to follow up in the dialogue, because we're going to see a lot of innovative new ways in which people are combining. Pierre Omidyar, for example, with Omidyar Network, has done some very, very interesting things where the line between the for-profit and the not-for-profit is blurring heavily. Andrew, tell us a little bit about your book and your background.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, you had asked me yesterday, what, am I on? I don't think so. Hello? Am I on? Okay. You had asked me yesterday, what's my connection or what am I doing here? And I think, if it weren't for, that last panel was really my dream team. Ray talked about his dream team. Without the work and the books that were written, I probably wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be in this field. Ray's book was really my starting point. Yvonne's life's work is an inspiration, and Amory's books and work have just changed the dialogue. And so I started as a business person, and I didn't have an environmental connection, and I had my spear in the chest was through the works of the people that are in this room, really. And I then ended up getting a degree in environmental management, and I had an MBA. And I set out, in some sense, to be a walking oxymoron and a corporate environmentalist. And I feel like the topic of this panel are these things that would have seemed like oxymorons a year or two ago. Venture philanthropy, entrepreneurial nonprofit. Like, we're putting these things together now in a way, and we're taking it for granted that that's, when you asked before who's a philanthropist, actually Ray Anderson raised his hand. I just had to chuckle. He's the CEO of a public company. And we're seeing a different dialogue now. And my book is, I co-authored a book called Green to Gold. And the focus of that was companies. It's a corporate perspective, corporate environmental strategy, another phrase that at first seems sort of odd when you hear it. And the goal was to understand what companies are doing to go green, what's working and what isn't. But I just want to share one aspect of the research that I think is applicable. When I was out there, I spent a couple years talking to people in all walks of life around this issue and talked to people in big environmental NGOs. And they would talk to me about their corporate partners and how they had to help them with their profit margins and product development. And it was all these very business-like terms. And I found myself asking NGO people, do you have an MBA? Oh, no, we just work with companies a lot. And then I would go interview environmental execs or people running factories at a company. And they would talk about their eco-efficiency and what they were doing, and then they would show me the plant and say, but let me show you the retrofit we did here, and look at this beautiful restored wetlands. And all the birdies are doing so wonderfully. And it was such a strange experience for me because I found that the dialogue and the conversation was almost switched. And that I felt there was this melding happening. Not everywhere, clearly, but in that sort of core group of companies that have been thinking about this for a while. There was a melding of the language and the tools and the style of business and private sector and nonprofit. And I think that's an amazing thing, and that's part of what I think the topic is today, is how do you bring the tools of business to nonprofits and the thinking of nonprofits to public good, stakeholder involvement, the common good, bring those to business. And I guess I would pose one question for the group to think about from one of the examples from my book, which is IKEA, which is one of my favorite companies in this realm, and they think very holistically about their impact on the world. And again, they're privately held, so it gives them some leeway. They had some problems in the mid-90s. A couple things came out about their supply chain, one of which was a documentary in Sweden about child labor for some of the products that were in their stores. So they set out to understand their supply chain. And I think the work they do in that realm is probably the best in the world. And a lot of it's focused on wood, and they track nearly every piece of wood back not just to their suppliers, which are the furniture makers, but back a step to the furniture maker suppliers, which is forests around the world. And they have 20 full-time foresters, which is more than many countries. And seriously, but one of the things they do that's interesting for this topic is to address the social and child labor issue. In some places in India, when they went in and looked and saw what the situation was, they realized, well, just firing these families and these kids wasn't a great solution either. And so they started to build schools, and they started to put money and time into building systems for kids to do something. And I guess the question I pose for this panel and everybody, is that the right role for a private or public corporation? Should they be doing it? And I don't actually have a good answer to that. It's something I've been thinking about for a few years since I talked to them. And I don't know if there's a great answer, but I think there is a role for business, and I think the idea that good work is good business is what companies are starting to recognize now, which is the work that I do as well.
Is there a relationship between the family-owned business versus public companies in this area?
Well, I would just say that, and I would apologize, I guess, to Yvonne, that there's very little of Patagonia in my book, and the reason is not because it wasn't one of the clear leaders in thinking green. It's because I think his example, as he said, sitting up here, is I don't have any shareholders. He doesn't have to worry about that. The example is very good in some ways, but not good for your typical business person. And I've been trying to reach out to the millions of people that don't come to these meetings and haven't been at the same conferences, and we've been all talking to each other and reading the books of the canon in this space, and reach just business people who aren't so sure. And they need to hear about big public companies and what middle managers are doing and the pressures they face and the struggles they face to deal with that pressure. And I think we saw that pressure. Jeff sitting up here from Coca-Cola, the tough questions you get now when it's tough to be a very big company trying to make this move. So I think there's a very big difference. I really believe that between a company that's owned by someone who can just make the decisions and one that has to answer to many different stakeholders.
Where do you put Ray and Bob Walton?
Well, I mean, I don't know the exact percentages of ownership. From what I understand, Ray was fundamentally the majority shareholder of his own company, and while public, had some of the same power in some sense as a private enterprise. That's the way it feels from the outside, and I think you can debate where the Walton family sits on that spectrum as well. It's a little bit different, but I think they don't feel the same ability to turn on a dime.
Well, I think those are good points, and there's probably a whole range in there. But I certainly think that founders of companies can do things that non-founders can't, even with public or not. Bill, tell us why you're here.
Well, I first met Amory about 20 years ago, around the time I started coming to Aspen, and started off just as a sort of a kindred spirit, having dinner and talking things over. Over the years, I got more involved as a donor to RMI. And then when he showed me the hypercar, and being from Detroit, I thought the transformation of the car industry was a good idea. So I put some money in, also some foundation money, family foundation money into hypercar, now DBA Fiber Forge. So became a real believer in his ideas. I know I went to a workshop at Esalen that Amory and Paul Hawken ran when they were working on the manuscript for Natural Capitalism, and got excited about that and Factor 4, this whole sequence of ideas. More recently, in 2004, we started building a sailboat and hired RMI, or Amory graciously consented to do a kind of an individual project, but to bring in a charrette, design charrette, bring in a whole team of experts from around the world, a lot of people who were mentioned for Janine Benius and others, to help us understand on this essentially little village kind of platform how you could integrate the systems, and with a real focus on demand side efficiency, which is not as glamorous as having a windmill or solar panels, but is much more cost effective, as Amory said for many years. And then segueing off that, shortly after I started that project, I joined Kleiner Perkins without a clear intention, but quickly developed into leading the partnership's drive to start investing in green tech innovation, with a lot of my partners and joining me in that, and really segueing off the design charrette that Amory had done and RMI had done for the sailboat. We did a design, essentially a design charrette around green tech innovation and green tech policy, which Amory and some present and former staffers from RMI helped us organize. We had our third instance of that. It's now almost 2 years old. Our third instance of that here in Aspen a few weeks ago, and Tom was there, and Al Gore, and Undersecretary Karsner from the administration, and people from California who'd done led the innovators, and so we've adopted a lot of the models that RMI used to drive innovation, not only to designing things technically, but also because we believe that public policy does matter, government does matter because it sets the rules. And just as our network went and lobbied for the passage of AB 32 in California, some of the discussion at the meeting we just had in Aspen was, what should we do about the bills that are in Congress? Because as President Clinton said, they're at least a step in the right direction. We have to figure out how to participate, and we have a voice with a network that we've put together to try to go lobby for a better outcome. What I'm doing now is investing in green technology at Kleiner. Let me tell you a little bit about Kleiner. They invested in my company when I started it in 1982. Son, it was John Doerr had just joined the partnership, was one of his first investments. The partnership actually dates from 1972, and it's seen many ways of innovation. We incubated Genentech, so that was before there was, this whole biological part of the industry. Involved in the very early days of personal computing, invested in Compaq and Sun and Lotus. We were involved in the network with Amazon and Netscape and Google. And so we've seen, a lot of these things driven by Moore's Law and by advances in biology over many years, and really believe in the power of technology to make transformational change possible. So when we sat down and we looked at the green tech space, we said, okay, well, We don't have Moore's law in a lot of these energy things, but we do have laws of physics and chemistry. So we set out and say, okay, we've got liquids and solids and gases and plasmas and chemistry and physics, and let's map out the space. Where are we, 20%? Well, we can't go more than 100%. Well, yes, we can, because we've got this tunneling through the complexity barrier that everybody talks about. You draw the circle bigger, and you get whole system efficiency. So we really sat down and mapped out, and being believers in innovation and doing things that are hard and sticking with things that are risky for the long term, I have made now about 25 investments, including some before I joined the partnership, and many of which are stealth in energy-related ventures. But I would say that these things can go to scale. Some of our ventures are private and have raised hundreds of millions of dollars of private money. They're still stealth, and that's the scale of the problem we face. There's a huge amount of transformation needed.
What kind of time frame do you have a model or something?
Well, our ventures, give you an example, we tend to invest in smart people with what appear to be good ideas. You know, Google was referred to us by Andy Bechtolsheim. They came to see him, my co-founder's son. He said, well, they thought they were going to make their money from banner ads. And I didn't think that was going to work, Andy said, but they seemed like smart guys, so I wrote them a check. You know, so obviously that one worked out very well financially for the investors. And I think we're taking the same approach, and he then graciously referred Google to us, but I think we're taking the same approach with respect to green tech. We're looking for real advances, because when we look out at the world, you say there's a, you know, 500 million or 1 billion, somewhere in that range, but only at most a tenth of the people on the planet are living a lifestyle that, say, we're used to. So if we need to cut our CO2 output by half, and we want to bring them up, everyone aspires to live a quality life, that means we're off by a factor of 20 in footprint. And Amy taught me this quote from Edwin Landis, said, innovation is the cessation of stupidity, okay? And I call it innovation type 1. And we heard a lot on the previous panel about ceasing doing stupid things to be more efficient. And obviously we should recycle plastic, okay? Well, that's that kind of innovation. But in order to write the factor of 20 on a long-term basis, we're going to need better science. And so that's the kind of thing we're investing with, a very long time horizon. They're often just science experiments, and they take 5 years to revenue, like the biotech investments do.
I always wanted to make beer cans out of compressed cow manure. Recycling doesn't make any sense.
You can drink it.
Hey, it's a bit of a marketing challenge, but there are people who've done that. Well, boy, that's a deep question,
Well,
particularly.
I should say one thing, a connection to
ahead.
philanthropy, which is that although we're a venture capital partnership, almost all of our limited partners are university endowments and other such things of that ilk. So we're actually sort of indirectly contributors to places like Stanford and Harvard. It's actually pretty direct, because the amount of money that they have made on these investments over the years is very, very large. And so that's feeding that cycle, because I think we need the education, more investment in education.
That's Julia's point about what do you do with the core, and if you principally, that core principle is invested in for profit, but things that allow you to invest more, that's great. Agreed. Michael, tell us a bit of the story, and how are you going to solve the dilemmas that we've listened to for the past several days, of the difference between seeing that you've got to, identifying the problem, seeing a solution, but having a lot of trouble connecting the two?
Actually, I have all those answers. And I'm concerned about letting them out too quick, or else what are we going to talk about the rest of the day? But I will say, I was a board member at RMI, and I was brought on by a very good friend that I was on another board with, and just fell in love with the mission. And really, our challenge at RMI has been a thought leader for 25 years, and has had extraordinary influence for 25 years. And the world has changed. People are waking up. Companies are more receptive. And RMI started to grow like crazy in response to this. And as a board member, I was a member of a small group they called the Strategic Growth Committee to help the team deal with the expansion. And I just completely fell in love with the mission and the projects and the team. And the board decided to recruit a CEO, and I raised my hand, and here I am. And it's fascinating because I'm a businessman, and I spent my whole career trying to grow things. And obviously, I grew things so that I could make money and my shareholders could make money, but also, you know, to help the world, and it was a fulfilling experience. But money was, you know, if you're just for the fulfilling experience, they replace you with somebody who wants to make money too. But I learned some skills that came in very handy once I started working with Amory, because you have to think that Amory is focused on some really important things, and he didn't spend 20 years running businesses. And when this thing started to take off, I found it was a great partnership. And you can imagine what a pleasure and honor it is to really partner with somebody like Amory. But it's an interesting set of challenges. For example, I am very accustomed to trying to hire the best possible team. And we have some variables that are different because we're looking for off-the-chart brilliance. This isn't just, how's your resume look? It's, can you be the one guy who walks into a meeting with 12 engineers at a utility and change the direction of that utility? You have to understand the science, you have to be persuasive, you have to have charisma. And those people are not common. Then not only that challenge, but also we're a nonprofit, so chances are the people with this skill set can go make more money working for a for-profit organization. Now, one of our challenges is we want to address that. I don't want somebody to work for RMI and take a big penalty for saving the world. I think you should get a Save the World bonus, in my opinion. But it takes some figuring out to get them to that level. I mean, a lot of these people have families, and they have to support them and want to send their kids to college. And it's a business challenge to figure out how to stay focused on the mission, but make sure people aren't making a sacrifice. Another interesting challenge is this is a really cool thing. I'm used to raising money, you know, going to venture capitalists or investors and saying, here's what we're doing, and this is why you should give us your money. The cool thing about RMI is when someone gives us their money, we don't even give it back. But it's a different challenge. But I'm finding that the questions are just as good, maybe better. And that foundations and individuals, we're at a time now where there has been a huge concentration of wealth. And these individuals are looking for a place to reallocate some of what they've gained toward the common good. And it's interesting to see people do that because they go through a transformation where this becomes their passion. And our job at RMI is basically to be worthy of that and to be scalable enough so that we can increase our impact. So that's an interesting challenge as well. And the last thing, which is an interesting contrast, is that I'm used to really looking at engagements and analyzing them. Usually, how profitable are they going to be, is my background. Now, we need to meet a baseline of sustainability for any project that's either funded by philanthropy or by a company that we're partnering with. But we're really looking for the most impact. And now there's so much demand for our work. I mean, our built environment team has more than a year of backlog already. That we've switched from trying to engage people to make the world better to really choose who we're going to work with. And our challenge is to find the people, the companies that are so committed to transformation that we know we can work with them and really drive a change that's an example. So we're still looking at deals. We still have reviews, but I'm not looking at the numbers as much as how committed, how high in the organization is it? Have they really put the resources on it? Are they really going to work in the long term? It's fascinating.
Are you concerned at all about growing so big that you become one of them?
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of our issues is, how do we grow? Because we don't want to get to the point where we're just a big job shop and we have 1,000 employees that we have to support, and it, and then our organizational immune system goes down, and we take any deal that'll pay the payroll. We're looking for the right sweet spot where we can have the scale to drive innovative change, but not be a slave to our own size. And we haven't figured that out yet, but we're asking the question. And we're also supplementing that by building partnerships with a number of other organizations that we can bring in on engagements that are big for us, or also that require very specialized, like engine drivetrain expertise, where we're just not going to build a team around that. But we try to build very good partnerships to make that happen.
So you've got a little bit of a virtual company along with the real company, which is what everybody is doing nowadays.
Exactly.
Taking that back to Bill, the challenges you have at Kleiner Perkins, where you have a project that a lot of money has been sunk into, you're a piece of it, but there's an immense amount. When there's so much capital riding onto that, how do you make sure that the value that is going to come from this in terms of shareholder dollars ends up really providing value to society, where society, because we talked about this in the last session, doesn't necessarily appreciate some of these externalities that we talked about?
Well, I can give you an example. We raised about a year and a half ago a pandemic biodefense fund, a specialty fund. It's rare. It's only the second time in 30 years that we've done, 35 years that we've done that. And it's investing in detection, diagnostic, therapeutics, and vaccines, and for things like pandemic influenza, which would be devastating, bird flu, essentially. And what we did for those is we have an internal spreadsheet we use to evaluate ventures, and we added a double bottom line. We have the profitability of the venture, because things will go farther in the world if they don't need charity all the time, and also the number of lives saved in a moderate pandemic. And we would double filter the ventures, because we really only have the time to work with maybe 10 or 12. And we wanted to also try to work on things that other people weren't doing. And I think that's the way we look at the green tech space, is to say, we do a lot of primary research, a lot with Google, a lot on the phone, and a lot of just thinking about what the science says is possible. And we think of this technology as kind of a prairie fire. It's just burning, it's burning forward, it's progressing, and there's an edge to it. And we see this and we see that, and it says, okay, the frontier is here. So something that's just adjacent to one of this point of progress is not that interesting. It's going to happen anyways. But occasionally you see something like in a forest fire where a tree crowns and the fire leaps forward. So once you learn where that frontier is, and then you see that thing that's farther out, you can say, okay, well, that one's going to make a real difference if I can make that into a great, durable enterprise. It's just a point technology. It may not make a difference. So then we say, okay, is this really going to be transformational? And you do that against our map of what the needs are. Clearly cleaning up coal is critical. Transportation is critical. And making buildings and cities more energy efficient. Those are the top three if you look at the energy flow charts. But that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is from the technology, and where is the opportunity for the 10 or 20x improvements that we're going to need to meet this very long-term goal of getting not factor 4 or factor 10, but like factor 20 more efficient in what we do. We need a double bottom line for energy, but it's not as clear-cut as the pandemic. We haven't come up with a single second bottom line. We're doing it more intuitively at the moment.
Jesse, how do you address that issue in the work that you do?
Well, we're probably less focused on the technology side and more focused on the financial infrastructure. And one of the things that we have found is it's the formation of capital that seems to be what's stopping the commercialization of great technologies that are already out there on the shelf. I think this world is perhaps different than the IT world, where if you want to make a change to a GE turbine, it's a $50 million improvement. It's not just adding a box and a box and a box. So we take a look at the technology, but then we look at the whole financial infrastructure and say, why isn't more capital going into the markets? And how do you go from uncertainty to risk? A lot of things we look at, it'll be a project that's a one-off project, and nobody wants to fund it. And so there are a lot of people who are on the sidelines. There's a lot of capital on the sidelines that once something is proven, everyone will follow in. Nobody wants to be first. More people might want to be second. So we take a look at proven technology or proven systems and see what we can do to help restructure the capital and how to go from uncertainty and strip out some of that uncertainty so it becomes risk. And once you get to risk, then people can sit there and do their spreadsheets and their models and make an investment on the risk. There's less people who are interested in doing an uncertainty, and I think that's a role for foundations, and that's a role for other capital. Foundations, John, you talked about PRIs. PRIs are something that are just not used very widely at all in the environmental sector. They're probably not used at all in the energy sector. And Amory, you'd probably know better than me.
That's program-related investments.
Program-related investments. And that enables a foundation to make a loan to a nonprofit or to a company, a for-profit company, at below market rates because there's certain risk that's associated. One of the things that we look at is there's so much capital that is tied up in foundations that just is being asset allocated into various different hedge funds and other asset classes, that if somehow they could find their way to the particular projects and put that asset to work, whether it's in a fund or whether it's a low interest loan as a PRI, it might jumpstart some of these businesses and technologies that are already out there. They're proven. They just can't get to that next stage of commercialization.
Bill.
I'd like to give 3 examples of leapfrogging technologies that would be outside your envelope where the financing's an issue. First one would be, say, energy storage. If we could have energy storage, an electron storage technology that was 10x better than batteries, it would change the renewable energy landscape. So that's something that was on our map from day one. Another example would be in the solar panels. If we could have inexpensive, made from just sand, basically, without a lot of energy input, say 50% efficient solar panels, that would change the energy landscape in the world very dramatically. And a third example is if we had some way to convert coal to electricity without burning it, like a direct coal fuel cell, which if co-located with a source of waste heat could be more than 100% efficient in recovering the energy that's in the coal and wouldn't have NOx and SOx and all these other problems that you have from combustion. So those 3 are examples of things that are not ready to deploy, but that we'll need if we're going to stay within the footprint longer term and also meet people's aspirations.
Well, I think, you asked the right question, is define needs, but define needs not in terms of what exists today, but just broad social needs. I think I was about to ask, but didn't, the issue of the unintended consequence department, particularly when you're going into these broad things. We certainly see it now in nanotechnology, for example, and there have been some big scare stories, but they haven't proven out. But we're dealing with an area about which we have zero experience. And when you're involved in that from an investment point of view, is that part of the externality if something goes awry? I mean,
for example, the right solution for solar panels shouldn't have a bad or rare metal in it because it can't go to scale. And I see lots of business plans where we can make some money, but it won't solve the bigger problem, so we're just not interested. Someone else will fund it, that's fine. I mean, we want to fund the ones that are more risky, longer term, and that will really solve the longer term problem. And so, using environmentally friendly ingredients, solar panels today, you have to make crystal and silicon, and it's years before you pay back the energy cost in manufacturing them. And they're all going to Germany and California instead of the places in the world where they do the most good. That's got to change, but it's got to change for very structural reasons in the way that the things are made.
One of the unintended consequences departments, of course, has been the genetically modified, say, rice where now it looks like we may have genetically modified rice everywhere because it was showing up in fields that were considered pure and organic, and they don't know how or why.
Well, you know, corn-based ethanol is probably the poster child for unintended consequences. And an example where when policy is laid out, capital will follow the policy. So it shows that, that capitalists are smart, and if there's policy, there goes the money. It's just unfortunate that it's the wrong policy. The unintended consequence, I mean, people will make a lot of money in corn-based ethanol. The farmers won't, and it's changed the whole dynamics of what is land use. And so more land is going into corn production. It's not being used for conservation. And in the end of the day, it'll be musical chairs, and it's the farmers who will be left holding the bag. That's, to me, an example of unintended consequences of what I think is a very bad policy.
Yeah, and Dean's observation about the subsidized corn, actually that was Yvonne's, I guess, but it exists everywhere. We subsidize things without understanding the full impact, and clearly the incredible leverage of a mistake is just as great, if not greater, than leverage of successful decisions. Julia, tell me what some of the specific things that the Lemelson Foundation is doing, particularly in terms of it's empowering schools and students and so forth to learn how and create more enterprises.
Sure. Thanks, John. Maybe I'll just go back first to this question I posed to the audience about the purpose of capital. I'm wondering if there's a show of hands if anyone wants to respond quickly to succinct thoughts they had about that. Great. Sustainable enterprise that will benefit the society for the future. Anybody else? Just a quick thought.
I would say that, capital needs to be put in service of wealth, and that wealth for the greatest number is also self-interest by extension.
Yeah. Part of the reason I asked the question is I was recently at an investors meeting, and there was a man who had been with Morgan Stanley for about 25 years and had done very well in a traditional investing capacity, and had stepped out of that world and started really reflecting on this question. And I thought he had come up with a very powerful, succinct answer, which is the purpose of capital is sustaining life. And that's where he took it. So kind of segueing back to the foundation and thinking about, okay, if you're working for a foundation and you've got capital, how do you deploy it in a way that you're working towards sustaining life? And I think going to the endowment piece, one could invest in things that Kleiner Perkins is doing that are truly, if you can determine that, working towards solving major global challenges and really taking the high-risk opportunities that are going to solve sustainability or basic human needs, major challenges. At the grant-making level, to tie in a little bit more closely to your question, we also see the role of the foundation to deploy its grant-making resources. So, not just investing in the endowment, but the 5% the foundation is required to pay out. How can we invest that money to really take that creativity responsibility seriously and invest in a lot of high-risk ideas to hopefully over time create a pipeline of inventors and ideas that will later get the Kleiner Perkins or other private sector capital. So one thing we do with universities in the US that I was talking to John about is we invest in a network of over 220 colleges and universities in the United States where students can form entrepreneurship teams. They're usually composed of multidisciplinary teams of students, engineering, arts, design, and business. And they come up with product ideas. And this is grant money, but once their ideas get to a certain point, they can then seek out more traditional sources of funding. And being in the United States, they have a pretty good chance of getting onto that pipeline. So I'll tell you a brief story about a young man who received a grant from the University of Portland, actually. He was born with no legs, one arm that was severely deformed, and one well-working arm. He was put out for adoption. His adopted family, when they adopted him, he expressed very strongly that he wanted mobility as much as possible in his life. He wanted to be upright. So they helped fit him with titanium legs and crutches. By the time he got to the university and had learned about this grant program offered by the foundation, his doctor was telling him he had to move to a wheelchair and would not be able to maintain his upright mobility because of the arthritic impact of these crutches on his back and shoulders. And he thought, well, here's an opportunity. I'll take this, I think it was about $15,000. It wasn't a lot of money. And I'm going to form this team. I'm a business person, I'm not a technologist, but I'll form this team and have them help me think through a crutch that might work for me to solve this problem. So he designed a crutch with a pivotal ankle joint to ensure more stability, a lot of shock absorption, a number of other features, lightweight, and got it onto the market, ended up launching a company. He now employs about 20 people, and it's about a $3 million a year company. So it's a small enterprise, but this is something that we can seed a lot of these ideas, and I think we also have to remember the power of small and medium enterprises in our economies, and certainly in the economies of the developing world. You look at the role of small and medium enterprise, that's the majority of the economy. So we're also doing the same thing in the developing world, where we support incubators of innovators, and these might not be university students, they could be, but they can also be grassroots inventors, so farmers with no education, but who have ideas. For example, one man in India of combining a number of plants to create a biofertilizer. And we also incubate ideas from professors or professionals. There's a doctor who we're working with in India, and she got tired of seeing these babies die because the incubators weren't working, that she decided to design a low-cost baby warmer because the ones that the government of India was buying were about $25,000 a piece, and they broke down and they were never replaced. So we're incubating a lot of these ideas. We recognize that there's going to be a high discard rate. But what we're hoping is that some of these ideas, as they get to the next stage, form a pipeline for more traditional investment and capital later on.
And hopefully, as a result of this meeting, perhaps you'll increase the percentage of projects that relate to the environment. Yeah, it's a big opportunity. Interestingly enough, we have a person in the audience who is an example of a not-for-profit that is a combination of both for-profit and not-for-profit activities. Shelburne Farms from out in Vermont, and it is focused on sustainable agriculture and a small model, but it is also bridging this thing that we've been talking about, where the line between profit and not-for-profit is blurring. But one of the interesting things about it is it's not simply the fact that the revenue from the profit-making projects is paying for some of the not-for-profit projects. It's the fact that there's visibility to all the people who are involved in that process, that there's a discipline to whether you're running a business or whether you're running a not-for-profit. And if any of you have seen some of the papers and work by Tom, what's his name, the Bain guy, Tierney. Tom Tierney has been and started a Bridgespan, and a Bridgestar, rather, both actually. And what he has been concerned about is that we are increasing foundations, and there are 92,000 foundations now in the United States, and of course they've really grown very, very rapidly in the last year or so. And the dilemma is we're growing the foundations, we're growing not-for-profits, but we're not growing leaders who can manage them. And therefore, hopefully, projects like the Lemelson Foundation will help produce people who can do that. I'm curious, Andrew, if in fact in your work with corporations, whether in fact they've recognized that as a very valuable service that they can provide to the community that would hopefully be enlightened self-interest.
Which service? The capital into certain projects?
No, not the financial one. The one about leadership and training.
Well, I mean, the easy answer for companies, I think, is to say, well, we can provide human capital, and I think that's a phenomenal thing to do. But I always get worried that when CSR, corporate social responsibility issues, get shunted off into the public affairs or into a separate group, and it's like, well, we planted trees on Earth Day, and that's sort of the end of their story about what they do. It comes back to what we heard on the last panel about taking responsibility for your product, about everything you do in the full value chain. I think one of the questions that I have as I listen to all this is about certain needs in society and where the capital comes from and which is the best place for it to come from. I think foundations are great for issues, and this is why it leans towards the social, where it's really hard to measure the benefits clearly. Companies are horrific at the cost-benefit equation, frankly. I mean, as everyone knows, like the discount rate companies use is nearly infinite if you're a CEO worried about the next quarter. And I think that's broken in a lot of ways, and it's hard to get those intangible benefits into a company's thinking and they seem willing to do things like put people in place because people are more dispensable to companies than capital, frankly. And to put people's free time or community involvement in place. The question is, are they going to put not just their philanthropy money, but their core business money into the innovations that we need to get to sustainability? And because that's where the serious money is. Will a business unit that wants to develop new technologies in water go find the innovators who are finding new water filtration techniques or something and put real money into it? But that's where we need it. Thank you.
I'd just like to make a little point along those lines. We hear a lot of talk, I don't know how many of you are familiar with C.K. Prahalad's work and the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, which presents an important idea that companies can really earn a lot of money if they start thinking about how they could market to the 4 billion people who are currently outside of their market. I think it's really important also to think from a different perspective. It's not just about Unilever being able to develop a 1-cent ice cream cone or packaging its soap in a smaller packet that a person earning $2 a day can afford, but how can we go this route of really thinking about leadership, thinking about people in the developing world who are earning $2 to $4 a day as investors. They do have capital. They will invest when there is a return on that investment. They are innovators. They are entrepreneurs. And how can we partner with companies so that they're actually seeing these individuals not as prospective consumers only of products that they design that are really consumptive-oriented products, but actually productivity-enhancing products. So we work a lot with entrepreneurs in the developing world who are thinking about productivity-enhancing technology. So in the area of environment, supporting a for-profit company that is working on bringing solar to people earning $2 to $4 a day because they are combining their delivery of solar with opportunities for income generation. So working with silk weavers or other folks who can then all of a sudden, by having access to light, can earn enough income that they can pay a lease on a solar panel because the technology has been customized and designed particularly for their needs. So thinking about individuals as entrepreneurs, and that of course creates so much more self-sustaining dynamic growth than just giving people products, which I'm not saying is unimportant, but I think we want to think about the whole systems picture and how you create self-sustaining dynamic growth.
Bill?
At our Green Tech Innovators meeting we had a few weeks ago in Aspen, Hal Harvey, Hewlett Foundation, presented us a framing opening presentation talking about an area in which I think philanthropy can innovate, and that is in the area of global policies, things like environmental standards and appliance standards. He said, for $600 million, we can make a huge difference, and you can measure the effectiveness if you say spend a small amount of money lobbying the Chinese to have better appliance standards. You can go to them and tell them that they'll save a huge amount of money instead of cleaning up the environment, and the return on investment for that money spent by nonprofits, NGOs, and others lobbying organizations like the government of China to do the right thing in their own rational self-interest, they're just not enlightened enough necessarily to have done it, is huge. And that's an area where philanthropy, entrepreneuring on the policy side can have a huge global impact.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's an RMI mantra, is recognizing that it's a system issue. And one of the major problems in the system issue is getting people to collaborate on policy, because that requires collaboration that business can't do because they're a vested interest piece, but philanthropy sometimes can.
Yeah, can I, one of the things that got me started on the investment side was when I was studying the philanthropic world, and this was about 7 years ago, it appeared that 3% of philanthropic dollars go into the environment. And so I said, I want to make a big difference in this environmental situation. How can I do it? And I said, if it's just 3%, and there are a lot of great organizations for the last 30 years have been trying to do it, there wasn't much that I felt personally that I could do to get that 3% to be 3.1% or 5% or whatever. And so I sort of shifted over to the capital markets and said that the solution to solving these problems is not going from 3 to 4%. It's actually trying to figure out how that 97% can be used to it. What you see happening is that if there is effective policy, you can tap into the corpus for foundations and for endowments. And if there are vehicles that they can make those investments in, then that money will flow into solving these problems. The challenge is, there are great funds now, and there weren't 5 or 7 years ago. So there's probably more of a demand to get into the traditional funds. But there are not other financial products out there that need to be established. There needs to be a project finance fund that needs to, or not, maybe it's not even a fund, maybe it's a collaboration of foundations that are getting together to put their money to work. When Dean was talking about his project, there's no reason why there isn't funding to go, if you've got a viable technology and it's a viable business, why can't there be funding? Why can't foundations do that? So in some ways, I think that there's a disconnect in the marketplace right now because there are a lot of great ideas, there are a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of excellent businesses, and on the other side, there's a lot of money sitting around in foundations who are looking to put that money to work. But I don't think that the financial infrastructure is in place to actually connect the entrepreneurs and those business opportunities with the capital that wants to put it to work.
Thank you. I'd like to give the audience a chance now to ask some questions, and number one, of course, is going to be Amory. Can we get the microphone? Oh, there's one standing microphone now.
Several years ago, I was asked to give a talk to some entrepreneurial philanthropists about how has RMI funded its 20-odd years of innovation. And I'd never written it down before, but when I really organized what we'd done, I was astonished to find we had already 11 different revenue models, 10 of which were entrepreneurial. Number 11 was grants and donations. Now, many of our partners in this room understand that this creates a lot of our effectiveness by the way we learn faster, solve real problems with highly motivated business partners, create buzz and street credibility and experience and competitive pressure for emulation. And it leverages their grants and donations 1-to-1, in some years 2-to-1. On the other hand, there are some foundations and private donors who say, well, if you're an entrepreneurial nonprofit and you're earning your keep, why should we give you any money? There are all these big companies that can fund you. So I wanted to ask Julie and others on the panel, do you see a way to help educate a wider group of philanthropists about the virtues of nonprofit enterprise that supports the mission, it's programmatic enterprise, and to see it as a plus, not a minus?
That is a classic and good question. Anybody want to take that on?
Sure, I'll start with that. I think it's a great question, and I think there is change and movement in the philanthropic sector because I think a lot of foundations are recognizing in some cases they're supporting, say, 30 to 40% of one enterprise, and they want to work with that organization to have greater diversity of funding sources. So you present a great case where you have such diversity of funding that it's more appealing to a lot of foundations. I think the other trend is that a lot more foundations are thinking about these program-related investments, which go towards the 5% payout requirement, but are debt or equity that by definition must be below market return because the social benefit supposedly outweighs the financial benefit. You as a foundation have to be able to demonstrate that. Traditional capital is not flowing. And so for some of your entrepreneurial ventures where they're still in the early stage, where it's likely to be true that traditional capital may not be flowing and that the social benefit outweighs the for-profit benefit, then I think, as foundations grow and move more towards making brave loan and equity investments that are at below market rates and think more creatively about how they're deploying their capital, you are perfectly positioned to accept that, and also a more secure investment for a lot of foundations because you have a track record of some past income streams that can be looked at when the financial due diligence is happening. So I think the trend is changing, but I think foundations can play a role in educating one another about how important this is.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Could I just do a follow-up? One of the thank you. One of the disturbing trends in foundations in recent years is that they've stopped funding innovation very largely and are driven now by a very predictive model that we will do this, it will have this chain of causal results which will yield this objective and this social return on investment. So the most creative, innovative sector of society is hardly paid to think anymore. And I'm wondering what you're doing in philanthropy to turn that around. I mean, I know that under those rules, we could not have created most of our intellectual capital, and it's really only the unrestricted grants and donations we get that really enable us to break new ground.
that's the venture equivalent of what Bill Joy said. Hey, that guy is really bright. Let's invest in him. So,
Let me just throw one quick, before you answer, one quick thanks. I forgot, when I said before that the people in the room made it possible for me to be here, I forgot one, which was Jesse Fink himself, that I am the recipient of foundation money. So I'm a huge fan of foundations, who allowed us to write the book and just basically put out intellectual ideas. So I just want to thank him publicly for that. And he said before he didn't do any social investing. It's not true. He invested in me and my book, so I can sit here and sound intelligent. So.
If I could, just briefly to further the Jesse Fink love fest, Jesse is actually working with us on some creative things to support fundamental research, which there's a lot of excitement to be involved in fundamental research, but Amory's right that foundations especially have gone to such a cause and effect outcome measurement model that it's hard to break new ground. But Jesse's on the right part.
please.
I'm Michael Ainsley, and I'm a trustee of a university, and I'd like to give one example and then ask a question of a model that I think, and very much along what Julia was outlining with her funding of social student entrepreneurs. About 6 years ago, our board was asked by our management at Vanderbilt to take 5% of our endowment, which was then about $2.5 billion, so $125 million, and create an academic venture capital fund. This was to fund research and projects that fell between the traditional departments. And the conviction of, I think, everyone at our school and our university was that the great breakthroughs were going to happen through collaborations, through the sciences and the soft fields working together and all of these things that we now know. Well, 6 years later, we funded 25 projects, $4 or $5 million a pop. 12 of them have been huge successes and are now self-sufficient with independent funding from other foundations and in some cases for-profit ventures. 12 have failed. It's not a bad rate, isn't it, Bill? Half. But interestingly, our endowment has gone from $2.5 billion to almost $4 billion, so we didn't penalize the endowment. And I encourage everybody, and I'm sure, how many of you sit on university boards in this room? I mean, I'm sure it's 30 or 40 people. We need to get more aggressive with our investing of capital and more creative, and we really can turn loose an enormous amount of energy. Do you see this happening in foundations or universities elsewhere?
Well, when we license technology from universities, the universities usually have the rights to participate. They generally get some percentage in exchange for the intellectual property, and usually participation rights in later rounds of the investment. And I don't understand why more universities don't follow the money. And I think that would be a good thing to do, invest in, with us. We typically invest in, say, the first 2 rounds and then find to broaden the investor base in the 3rd round. But if it's a seed round, then I think the universities should be in A and B. And if it's an A round, they should put money in B, hold their percentage, and participate. In a more direct way, it's you carry free limited partnership investment with us.
Did anybody want to talk about the downside to that? Okay. The dilemma, I think, is that those investments may give the appearance at some point that the university cannot be an honest broker in topics in which that investment has been made.
Well, Bill is talking about investing in ventures. I was talking about pure research, where you bring new professors to campus,
Understood.
take existing professors. That may then lead to ventures in the future.
It should be a virtuous cycle, though.
Yeah,
I mean, that was just
sure.
on the one arc of the virtuous cycle.
Can we have another question here? Got a line up back there.
Yes, thinking about the scope and scale of the challenges we're facing. You know, yesterday, Tom Friedman talking about 2 or 3 billion people becoming middle class. And then earlier that Ray Anderson talked about externalities. Nobody actually are paying attention, it's right, corporations or nations. So thinking about the experience we have Kyoto Protocol, can you comment on our possibility of establishing international organization to look at these issues more systematically? Otherwise, you know, given all the wonderful technologies we have out there, given the experience Dean Kamen had, I don't think we're going to solve this problem.
Does your Green Tech Alliance help?
Jim might be able to answer that better than anybody here.
Summarize then, Jesse.
You know, and I guess, and it's just one person's opinion, but in the travels that we've done, it seems like the rest of the world is looking for the United States to step up and take a leadership role. And there's a lot happening at the other country levels, but I do think that it's really incumbent upon the U.S. to step up, take a role. There's so much capital that's here that actually can be flown to, imported into the developing countries. And so I think there's a lot happening. The UN's involved. There's a lot of the Clinton Foundation, I think, is doing so much in their work as well. So.
I would just add that because my work is in the private sector, I look at what's going on in some of the groups that have gotten together. When DuPont, Alcoa, now GM, Shell, all these huge companies come together and go to the U.S. Congress together in January and say, we want a cap. Isn't that an international organization fundamentally? These are multinational corporations representing more wealth than most countries. So I think, and when Walmart says to its suppliers, you got to use less fossil fuels, I think that's more important than the Kyoto Protocol. I really do. I think we're going to see more change through the private sector demanding of itself and of its governments change. So I think we are seeing international organizations where there's been some failure of international governance from a UNEP kind of perspective.
There was also just a brief comment from Davos that came out from the World Economic Forum this year, where climate change was put as the top issue on the agenda. People said the U.S. is not going to agree to any kind of standard and take the lead as it should until it forms a separate agreement with China and figures out what China's doing. So, these are people who've negotiated for the past 10 to 15 years on behalf of the U.S. who said, there's absolutely no way. There's got to be first a bilateral agreement with China and what the U.S. and China are going to do with one another, and then there can be a global agreement. But without that worked out, the U.S. won't go very far.
As optimistic as I am about what companies can do, I think a lot of people whose opinion I respect think until we put a price on carbon, we're not going to make it. We're not going to get the problem solved before we have catastrophic consequences. And
Yeah,
the political will to do that in the U.S. is
what's
lacking.
the methodology?
We have to, and foundations can help advocate and change a consciousness, as Vice President Gore has been talking about, to bring about people wanting to see that and willing to see that happen.
But when environmental defense sat with those companies and the NGOs and the companies came together to Congress, a couple senators said, well, now you have our attention. Like it took that, so they asked for that price, in effect, a cap, but they didn't ask for a tax.
Well, what they need is the air cover from public opinion to be able to do it.
Right.
Fair enough. Can we give some of the people in our line a chance to ask their questions?
Yeah, Bill, I'm just curious, your partner, Vinod, or former partner, why is he off doing his clean tech on his own? Does he have a different approach or so on, or is he just interested in sugar ethanol, or what's the difference between what you're doing at Kleiner and what he's doing? Because he's certainly got a lot of publicity for what he's doing.
He was particularly passionate about that, and I think wanted to put a lot of his personal money behind some very, very particular, narrowly defined ideas that he had. Our partnership is a little broader, and we have a very amicable working relationship and co-investing on many of the things with him. But he's set up his own shop. I'm co-invested in a venture with him, operating independently.
Next. Thank you.
If we reach runaway climate change, 450 parts or 500 parts per million of greenhouse gases, what is going to be the value of capital? And are we capable, with our clinging to security, financial security and things, are we capable of changing our minds fast enough to move as fast as we need to go on this? Basically, what's the value of capital if we reach runaway climate change?
Michael, why don't you take a stab?
Hi, Ann. That's a great question, and it's a two-part question. So I'll take a shot at the second one first. And it's are we capable? And that's there are some civilizations where the entrenched interests figured it out and saved the civilization. There's some civilizations where they didn't. And this is a huge global issue. And this is like the issue now, because this is the civilization. It's a global deal now. It's not like this will die out and some other civilization will grow. This is the one. So that's a big question. And one thing I see as I work with individuals and foundations, there's kind of a feeling of powerlessness that this thing is just so big. How could we ever have a shot at it? And nobody knows.
Can the best efforts that people have described do it in time?
See, and that's one thing I was going to mention before. I want to be concerned, or I am concerned, that we don't overvalue the importance of policy. If we change the carbon pricing, that's important. If we change corn, that's important. If we change the laws, that's important. But this is a global issue now, and there are different policies all over the world. Gas costs a lot more in Europe, and cars are only marginally more efficient in Europe. They're somewhat more, but not hugely more, not in proportion to the cost of gas. So it's going to take a lot more determination, and it's frankly going to take some old-fashioned problem solving of how do you make a car a lot more efficient. I mean, how much can you jack the price of gas up? People just drive less. Their cars are still inefficient.
But if the culture is different and the infrastructure is changed back to
Right.
RMI 101?
Exactly. And I'd also propose that I don't know that this symposium would have happened 5 years ago. So if we're going to see hope, maybe the world is waking up.
You know, I think you also.
We're running down to end. I'd like to take 2 more questions, and please ask your questions, sir.
Okay. I'm very encouraged today to see that the great ingenuity of our society is now being directed. But it seems to me that we're toward improving our environment. But it seems to me that all the discussion today has been on incremental improvements in our environment. But perhaps the true problem we should be addressing is sudden, existential environmental disaster. And I wonder what we could do to apply the great ingenuity of our society and invest monies in this area, because you're not going to get a return for it, but it may be our most pressing problem.
Well, people always say that society only, particularly America, responds to crisis, when we may be just working our way into one. But unfortunately, the turn time may not be as good. Maybe we need a nuclear war instead. Sorry, next question, please.
My major concern is on the lack of funding in education, especially higher education. The funding that has been lost in the area of science over the last several 20, 30 years. We were the leader. America's been the leader. People have come from all over the world to come here to get their education, and that is changing. And it seems to me, with this incredible opportunity, with this new environmental research, scientific, I mean, it's huge opportunity out there. And my question is, how do we get that funding back into the schools? Is it something that private corporations do, or the private sector, and that has a lot of issues that come around it? Are they directing research, et cetera? Or is it something that foundations can start to be taking that on? If there is all this money out there, and my concern is, who's taking that on? Is it something that should be done legislatively? There's a lot of people that are on university boards here in this room. It sure seems like where a lot of that innovation happens, it happens with the young the kids in college. The innovation for creating the new batteries, the new solar panels, a lot of that innovation should be happening now in the schools, and so much of the funding has disappeared. And I'm just curious on what this panel thinks on how we can get some of that funding back into the schools.
You want to take a shot?
We met with a president of one of the major science and engineering universities in the country maybe 6 months ago, and complained that their enrollment had dropped. The U.S. and China, if you look at science and engineers graduated versus lawyers, they're flipped. You can work out which is graduating more lawyers for yourself. And so
Sports management, too.
But I think, you know, Stanford made a great fortune with the railroads and then started a great university. Lots of people have made great fortune. We talked about the concentration of wealth. Let's do something really big. Create a new university. Create a university of the net or something. Find some way, because we have to do continuing education at a time of such rapid change. A lot more money has to go into education in innovative ways.
I
And
think
so,
we also need to look at why students aren't pursuing science and engineering in this country as they used to. I mean, the recognition of that fear was the foundation for our founders' decision to create the Lemelson Foundation, which was really focused on the U.S. initially, saying, you know, we as a society have grown because of our innovation and entrepreneurship and our dedication to science and technology, and we're starting to lose ground. This was in the early 80s. He felt we were starting to lose ground to Japan and other countries, and so he said, we need to think about how to cultivate that in our society. So it was partly investing in these university programs, one of which I described. It was partly in investing in recognition. So we launched a Lemelson MIT Prize, the largest cash award for invention, given it's a $500,000 award every year. And the idea was to put role models up for kids. We're now making sure it's a mid-career person so that young people can really relate to that person more than maybe someone at the end of their career. But to try to see that sports stars and rock stars aren't the only heroes, but really scientists and inventors can be heroes too.
You've just defined first.
yeah, we need
Exactly.
to do, yeah, we need
Dean
to,
started.
I was segueing into that.
Yes,
look up
yes,
what Dean
I
has
had to do
done.
it, right.
And
Yeah,
with
it first stands for inspiration and recognition of science and technology. And what it does is it works just outside the schools, but it gets kids literally from K to 12, different programs, to go in and they build a robot. Now, they build it with mentors who are engineers, or sometimes now college students, because the number of people who need to be mentored is growing and growing. But the whole idea is making science and technology cool. If you get the incentive right, the kids will take it from there, and they will become the future environmental scientists that we need. And once again, thank you, the panel. Thank you, great audience. Good questions.